Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for In the Hands of the Prophets, which is episode 19 of season 1 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And this video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the Deep Space Nine first season finale, In the Hands of the Prophets. So In the Hands of the Prophets is the episode in which Vedek Winn, a extremist, comes on board the station and wants to shut down the Federation school for not teaching about the prophets. Eventually, this creates more turmoil, as Bajorans refuse to service to Federation members. They refuse to show up for work, creating more of a divide between the Bajoran and Federation forces. So Sisko turns to Bariel, the Vedek who is most likely to become the next Kai, who's a bit more progressive, and asks for help. He at first refuses, saying it's not politically viable. However, a bomb then goes off and destroys the school. Thankfully, no one is hurt, but this creates more turmoil, so Bariel does agree to come to the station. Sisko confronts Vedek Winn in public, who calls him the devil, but he tells her that she just made her first mistake. Meanwhile, there's a murder investigation going on, as one of O'Brien's engineers turned up dead, and no one knows why, and they eventually unravel that someone was trying to sabotage a runabout pad, and this engineer found them, so they killed this person, moved his remains somewhere else, and then returned to a different runabout pad to try to continue the sabotage. We soon learn that this individual is in fact Neela, O'Brien's Bajoran assistant that he was working very close with, because she apparently is a flock, a member of Vedek Winn's flock, and Vedek Winn has convinced her to assassinate Vedek Bariel, and so she was sabotaging the runabout in order to plan her escape. But since they discovered that her sabotage with the runabout and locked it down, she says she will no longer be able to escape, and Vedek Winn just tells her, oh, if that's the will of the prophets, then so be it. And she unfortunately is naive and tries to go through with the assassination, but fortunately, O'Brien figures it out just in the nick of time and tells Sisko, who in slow motion, yelling, "No!" manages to stop her before she can kill Bariel. And they now learn, Kira is now aware that she was fooled by Winn, that of how despicable she is, and that she just planned the whole thing in order to kill Vedek Bariel so that he wouldn't become Kai to clear the way for her. But she, of course, denies it, and they have no evidence because Neela insists that she was acting alone. However, Kira and Sisko lament on how much they have grown close to each other, and Kira admits that everything Sisko said was correct, that the Bajoran and Starfleet officers that work together have worked a lot closer, and they do consider themselves friends. So, yeah, sorry for the detailed synopsis. I just wanted to throw that out there. Anyway, so this is the series, or not series, the season 1 finale. And I remember when I first saw this when I was 14. I remember very clearly because it was in the summer. I actually saw it like a week before, but then I remember going to a resort town. My family used to go take the family vacations to the resort city that was only 2-hour drive away, but it was on the ocean. And I remember going there to this condo, and I knew the TNG Season 6 finale, Descent, was going to air, and so I wanted to get to the condo in time to watch it, but we showed up right at the last second, and so I saw the last 5 minutes of it, which didn't spoil it for me because I read in the TV guide that Laura would be working with the Borg, so nothing was spoiled, but still, I did kind of spoil the ending for myself a little bit, but I'll talk more about that when I cover Descent. Point is, Deep Space Nine came on right after it, and it was this episode, which, as I said, I had already seen because it had aired earlier that week on Monday, so this was just the replay of it. But since I missed TNG, I watched this one for a second time instead, so I had memories of watching it in the blurring hot summer and then going out and going swimming in the ocean or going to the beach right afterwards. So that's my personal memory. But I remember being very disappointed by this. In fact, I was more like excited about this big Borg cliffhanger than I was in this boring Bajoran religious idiots going around doing stupid shit. And I was expecting Deep Space Nine to have a big 2-part cliffhanger, because that's what Next Generation has done every season. So I was actually really disappointed. You'll be disappointed. I was really disappointed that they didn't do that. That instead it just had some silly episode about these religious people doing stupid shit. But mind you, I was 14, and so now, at the ripe old age of what I am now, well, you could do the math if you really want to figure it out, but now I've sort of I don't know if I love In the Hands of the Prophets, but I do really like it. And I don't like Descent, particularly because it was ruined by Part 2. So it's funny, in time, as I grew older, I learned to appreciate In the Hands of the Prophets more and see more how bad Descent is. So now I think In the Hands of the Prophets is far superior to Descent. So it's funny that I was disappointed in it to begin with. And the funny thing is I've been reading about how the original plan for the Deep Space Nine Season 1 finale was to do a big cliffhanger, to do a big 2-part cliffhanger about the Cardassians trying to retake the station, and the Enterprise shows up and they team up to stop this Cardassian invasion. And back then, that's something more along the lines of what I would have wanted. Now, for one thing, if they can do this and Descent at the same time, because it would make no sense unless they say it's not taking place in chronological order, because how can the Enterprise be at Deep Space Nine and fighting the Borg at the same time, because both would be cliffhangers. But they decided not to do this, and Ira Stephen Bear said something along the lines of, that was TNG's thing, to always have to end the season with the cliffhanger. I don't see why we needed to do that on Deep Space Nine. And in addition, we didn't have the budget. We didn't have enough money to do a grandiose epic episode. So if we tried, it probably wouldn't turn out very well. And I actually think that's very wise. I think there's other episodes I talked about in the past where, because they didn't have the budget for it, kind of fell apart. And I was like, well, they shouldn't have tried to do it in the first place if they knew they didn't have the budget for it. And so here, they actually were wise enough. So once that big, cliffhanger and Cardassian invasion storyline was nixed, Pillar came up with the idea to harken it back to the pilot episode Emissary and have to deal more with the Bajoran politics and how religion controls their society, and get into like a political thriller and sort of tie it back to that episode, which I do think is wise. And I do think a lot of people do point out that this is a pretty good bookend to the pilot episode, the first episode of the season. So, as I said, now I appreciate this episode a hell of a lot more. But speaking of Emissary, that just reminds me that Winn refers to Sisko as the Emissary. This is the first time outside of Opaka in the pilot episode. But all Opaka said in the pilot episode was ironic that one who does not wish to be among us is to be the Emissary. And then that term is never mentioned again. Yes, they named the episode after that, but in the actual show, none of the characters mention that until this episode. And I remember being kind of surprised about her when I first saw this episode of her saying, yes, Emissary, and Benjamin being like, I wish you wouldn't call me that. Commander Sisko, or Benjamin, if you like. So, I'm of the very strong mind that what they do with Sisko and becoming the Emissary is gradually retconned. Or if you think retcon is too strong of a word, it was gradually changed. That the original concept, much like the prophets, the wormhole aliens, which I'll get to when I get to, because, yeah, they were meant to just be these weird aliens that don't really know anything, that just exist outside of time, but then they morphed them into these gods that smile in Bajor, which absolutely is true. People who try to argue against that are wrong, but as I said, talk more about that in other episodes. But as far as the Emissary goes, that too was also morphed. Because I really do get the strong impression, even in this episode, when Vedek Winn is calling him Emissary. Yes, Emissary. That the Emissary is more like, trying to think, I'm not that familiar with any religion, even though I did go to Sunday school, but I don't remember any of it. But I think I was going to say like a prophet, but that's confusing because they call their gods prophets. But as we look at in Catholicism, what you would refer to as a prophet. But I think even that would be too strong of a word. Like if I was thinking of something like Moses or Noah or something like that, but I think even that, like he wasn't that big of a figure, I believe, at the start. I believe he was just someone who was like a name mentioned in the text. Like he wasn't supposed to be a religious leader or any kind of spiritual leader. He was just someone who was meant to discover the celestial temple. And I really get that's all that comes out of that first episode. And then even then, this is the first hint that the Bajoran people are kind of worshiping him. But I believe, if I remember correctly, if my memory suits me, this isn't really touched on again until season 3. And I think season 4, the episode Ascension, is the first time where they morph it into, he's not just a random figure from their mythology. Now he's like a important religious leader. And they showed the Emissary of having like political power. And I think that was a retcon, but of course it gets even worse until you get to the end of the season where he's basically almost like a god himself, or at the very least like a shining religious figure, like a pope almost, sort of, but which I think is a gigantic retcon from where we first start. But that is just my humble opinion. Anyway, So this is something I didn't really appreciate when I first saw this episode because I was too young. It kind of went over my head that this was a commentary on the whole creationism trying to ban teaching the theory of evolution. And this was prominent not only in the 90s, but I remember continuing onwards into the 2000s and even the early 2010s, this being a big deal. Although now, unfortunately, it's kind of morphed into not necessarily, I mean, there is still some creationism and whatnot, but the bigger issue, the more public issue, is the banning books that have anything to do with LGBT community or anything to do with black history. They want to try to erase black history and say, well, they're trying to divide Americans by teaching America about their actual history and whitewashing history, basically. So that's become the bigger issue. Anything that's seen as progressive or inclusive is called pornography and banned. I'm sorry, I watch a lot of political videos. I try not to bring them into my Star Trek reviews, but this is a political episode, so I am going to go ahead and talk about this because I've watched some videos where where someone's complaining about the book banning that's going on, and someone else retorts, well, it's weird of you to want to keep pornography in schools, which is a lie, which is a straw man, which is a complete bullshit. The vast majority of books being banned don't even have sexual content, and the ones that do also have literary purpose, literary meaning. Maybe there's like a picture of a statue that happens to be naked or something like that they want to ban. The banning of books is unacceptable, and for idiots who are either being idiotic or intentionally dishonest to put out the bullshit line about, oh, why do you want pornography in schools? I'm like, that's Kai Winn. Or Vedek Winn. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. But that's Vedek Winn in this episode. Exactly. Well, not exactly. As I said, like this episode was obviously more directly, and it's very obvious, a commentary on the whole creationism thing. Like, they pretty much head on. It's like, you got to teach this in a religious way. If you're teaching this about the wormhole, about the celestial temple, and you're not saying that's the home of the prophets and it's the celestial temple and the ships are guided by the hands of the prophets, then that's blasphemy, and you are poisoning the minds of the children. I remember actually arguing with people who tried to justify creationism, and they would always say, oh, it's called the theory. It's just a theory of evolution, not understanding the scientific term in which the word theory is often used. It doesn't mean it's just a theory. Oh my God. That was so frustrating. But anyway, so yeah, they obviously had a very strong message in that regard. Robert Hewitt Wolf talked a little bit, who wrote the episode, talked a little bit about how that was his intention, to sort of portray these Federation ideals of, having respect for other religions and other cultures, but not allowing other, extremists to shut down discourse, to shut down education, to try to force their religious beliefs on others, which I think that's really poignant, and that's quite powerful. Now, I've heard the opinion that what Sisko is doing is also trying to force his opinion on others, but his opinion just so happens to be the correct one and is one of more inclusiveness. And I just think that is a kind of just an incorrect way to state it. It's just kind of I don't think it's an accurate way. It's not using language correctly to state it that way. What it really reminds me of is, and this is someone I used to argue with back in the early 2010s, or late 2000s, one or the other. But he was very homophobic, and I used to argue with him because he was a Mormon, but that's no excuse. Again, it's religion bringing it. But anyway, he was very homophobic, and I used to have these arguments with him online. And something he would always say is that people, that the left, he would always say, the left, those bloody liberals, those bleeding heart liberals, are hypocrites because they call people intolerant, but they themselves are intolerant of intolerance. That because they may insult or fight back or argue or try to block those who are bigoted in some way, that makes them bigoted. And that's the same kind of, that's a fallacy. That's complete and utter nonsense. That sounds to me like something a Ku Klux Klan member would say about someone trying to fight racism back in the early 20th century. Like, oh, well, if you're fighting against us white people, then you're just as bigoted as we are, if not worse. In fact, there's that thing is still happening with race as well. As the whole being racist towards white people thing is all just an example of that. But people who say that, so it's a fallacy. It's you fighting bigotry, fighting against intolerance, and not tolerating intolerance is not in itself intolerant. It's not in itself bigotry. It's standing up against bigotry. And so to phrase it that way is just incorrect. It is just a twisted, poor use of language, purposely twisting language to try to demonize those who are fighting bigotry. And I feel like, now in this case, to be fair, I don't think they're trying to demonize Sisko, because they were actually saying that he was right. But I do think it's the same sort of twisted way of using language inaccurately to say that he's trying to force his beliefs on others, when that's clearly not the case. He's not trying to force his being nice. I mean, you could say, oh, he's trying to force everyone to be tolerant and get along, but he's not trying to force it. He's trying to have that outcome, which is, again, it's like you're twisting the language to make him look worse than he is. But that's just my humble opinion. Now, as far as, because one of the examples in this episode, it's a scene I really love, by the way, that kind of proves this, is one of my favorite scenes when Benjamin is talking to Jake, and Jake is, talking about how he learned about Galileo, and it's like, how could people be so stupid? And Sisko's like, oh, well, that was centuries ago. And then Jake was like, yeah, but it's happening right now. It's just the same thing of what the Bajoran's doing, and it's dumb. And I love Benjamin's reactions. Whoa, whoa, whoa. You can't say that it's dumb, even though he's very much against what Vedek Winn is doing, and he thinks it's not helpful, but he's not going to dismiss their entire belief system. He's saying, as for, why can't they just be called prophets? And I love this. To me, this is one of the best character building moments for Benjamin Sisko in the show. And also shows what a great father he is. It's a really good scene. I really like that scene a lot. Now, speaking of Vedek Winn, this is her first introduction in the show, and I remember thinking, I remember like talking to my sisters, like, I think when season 2 was starting, and we knew that Winn and Bariel would be in the 3-parter that opened the season, and I remember we were talking about, oh yeah, those religious people are coming back, and they're going to be in this. But some people refer to Vedek Winn as a get off my screen character, and I get that. I'm not going to say she's not annoying. There are some times when I see her, I'm like, oh God, do we really need to see her again? Does she need to be in this episode? Because so I can definitely relate to that a lot, but I don't think I would go as far as to say myself that she's a get off my screen character. Well, she's acted very well, and what they do, how they portrayed this character, is amazingly well. They establish this clear character, which they kind of forget about and try to retcon in the season 5 episode Rapture, which I already covered, and I already talked about how they tried to retcon her character. But thankfully, after that, when she returned in season 6 and season 7, they fought again, or they undid that retcon and then took her back to where her character needs to be. Because, again, this is getting back into season 7, but I remember hearing a lot of people complaining about her joining the Pile race, and that she would never do that, and that's against her character. Absolutely not. It is 100% in her character, especially relate how she's introduced in this episode. She is basically the surrogate for, and I can't really think of a real life example off the top of my head, but I'm sure there's probably closer resembles actually historical figures, but also could, definitely resemble some current day figures as well. But someone who uses religion as a means to gain power and to get power over people, and doesn't actually really care about religion. They just pretend to in order to manipulate people, which unfortunately was extremely common throughout history. Which is why, the Catholic Church used to be like so powerful, and the priests would be rich and seen almost as gods. In fact, the writers of this episode said that they based this episode off of, or at least the political structure, off of Catholicism in the 15th and 16th century, when they used to actually control the power, and that the person who becomes Kai, we always related to, oh yeah, that's like the Pope. But it's not like the Pope now. It's like the Pope back in the 16th century, where they used to have lots of wealth and power and used to control like the political landscape. That is more like what they're portraying in this Bajoran system now. And so when Winn wants to become the Kai, it's not because she wants to be the spiritual leader of Bajor. It's not because she wants to lead Bajor into a more enlightened spiritual place. It's because she wants fucking power. And that's why Rapture retconned her character, because it portrayed her as someone who was genuinely religious and cared about what the prophets thought. And I think the journey she went through in season 7, where she finally came to a conclusion, because Kira flat out gave her a choice. If you want to keep your religion, you want to keep your spirituality, when you keep your faith, you have to give up your power. And she's like, no, fuck that. and I love that. It was so true to her character. In fact, if they wanted to be extremely true to her character, the way she's portrayed here in this episode, she would have never even considered like putting her faith above her power, because it's very clear in this episode, like, she tried to assassinate someone. She manipulated someone perfectly into murdering a Starfleet officer and trying to assassinate the main Bajoran figure who's about to become Kai. She is beyond despicable, and all she cares about is power. In fact, she is so manipulative. She went there and causes trouble with the school. I don't know if she's directly responsible for the bomb. They never actually state that, and Benjamin even outright says, like, it doesn't matter if she was directly responsible or not. She influenced it. She engineered it. She made it possible. And so, in fact, that reminds me a lot of the Bill O'Reilly and the Tiller the Baby Killer thing, where he would go on a rant on his show repeatedly over and over and over again, ranting against this abortion doctor and calling him the baby killer, and then eventually some wacko goes out and kill him, and Bill O'Reilly, I don't know, this has nothing to do with me, which is absolute bullshit. In my opinion, he should have been charged for accessory to murder, but of course they're not going to do that. Now other people go, freedom of press, but let me put it to you this way. During the Holocaust, propagandists who didn't fire a gun or kill anyone, but orchestrated propaganda that fueled all the Holocaust and murders, were considered war criminals, and rightfully so. So I think that Bill O'Reilly thing was the exact same situation as that. People were being hypocrites to say otherwise. But, again, sorry, getting off topic. But Winn's the same way. So it doesn't matter whether or not she directly planned the bomb or not. She's the one that influenced the wackos. Now, the trying to assassinate Bariel, we do know. And the episode does make it very clear that she did directly influenced. Like, she specifically told Neela to do it, and it's realistic that there would be people so devoted and so blind that they would just go out and do what their almighty leader says. And you probably know which current day political figure I'm thinking of when I say that. American political figure I'm thinking of when I say that. Kind of creates a cult around this particular person. But anyway, I warned you I was going to get political, so don't complain. But anyway, so yeah, I love the way that Neela was portrayed too, as you see that she was struggling with the conscience, and she felt guilty about killing the Starfleet officer, because that wasn't her plan. It was just because he interrupted her and she improvised, and she was feeling very guilty about it. And I think I've heard different opinions on whether or not she actually had a thing for O'Brien. Some people were saying that she was flirting with him purposely to distract him, but I actually don't think so, because I actually had the opposite reaction, because that scene where she's kind of flirting with him and he's like, oh, that's okay, go away now, I'll take care of this now, and O'Brien's like, on your toes, because he was feeling something in return for her. I don't think she was faking it, because here's the thing, I think it actually hurts her to the fact that he shooed her away is bad for her, because he's finishing up without her, where if she was there, she could still manipulate the scene and cover her tracks, or maybe sabotage the thing, but because he sent her away, she won't be able to do that. So I think that was my impression anyway, that actually hurt her by doing that. I think she genuinely does have those feelings for him. And the scene when she's talking to him about, oh, I didn't know Ensign Okino that well, how was he? It was obvious she was feeling incredibly guilty about killing him, but she was just so blinded by her cult leader that she couldn't help it, that she couldn't, even though she knew was wrong and felt guilty, she thought she was convinced it's what her gods wanted her to do, to assassinate this other political figure. Because I'm sure Vedek Winn portrayed him as the evil devil, and if he becomes Kai, then Bajor will go into darkness. And because she was so devoted to her and basically a cult, she believed her and did it, and thought that, the whole world depended on him dying. But she didn't feel good about having to murder innocent Starfleet officers, and she didn't see the Starfleet officers as evil people because she worked with them, she knew them. And so I do feel I could see, and I think the actress did an amazing job too in a lot of the scenes where she didn't even have any dialogue. You could tell how guilty she was feeling or how she was processing everything. Like when Sisko gave this speech, for example, I think she, agreed with him, but her devotion to her cult leader overrid any of that, though. Speaking of Bariel, we meet him in this episode for the first time, too. And I think this is actually started out as a really good character. In this episode, he was a good character. In the Circle trilogy, he was a really good character. It was once they put him with Cure is when his character went I'll get to it when I get to it, but their interactions in later episodes were so wooden and fake, and it ruined his character, so I can really understand why they would eventually kill him off. But he was good to begin with. It was one of my favorite lines of the episode is when Sisko asks to speak at the Vedek Assembly, and Bariel's just like, no, sorry, they won't see you because some fear you as godless, some fear you as the man who walked with the prophets, and some fear you because Vedek Winn told them to. And he's like, and Sisko's like, so in other words, if you were to help me, that would hurt your chances of becoming Kai. And he's like, well, the prophets teach us patience. And Benjamin, this is my favorite line, when Benjamin says that it appears the prophets also teach you politics. And I do love the political situation that they do create. Now, as I said, we'll definitely we'll explore the Bajoran political divide more in the Circle trilogy, which I had already reviewed, but I will be covering that in Revisited. But that's because I wonder how much of the original idea of having the Cardassian invasion survived to be in the Circle trilogy. I think most of it changed, obviously, because the Enterprise didn't show up and there wasn't a huge invasion, but the Cardassians did try to take over Deep Space Nine. It was just more stealthy and more sort of manipulating, and they were purposely manipulating this Bajoran extremist fashion in order to do it. So it was still ultimately about the Cardassians trying to retake the station. But I think because they did this episode and they touched on this multi-political religious situation of Bajor, I think that's what inspired them. That's why the opening trilogy of season 2 took that form instead of the whole Enterprise going to fight off Cardassians form, which honestly I think is better. I actually really like the Circle trilogy. As I said, I already reviewed it, and I think it's a bit underrated. So I think this definitely inspired that, and I do think it's kind of unfortunate that we do lose some of the Bajoran politics in later seasons. I mean, the Dominion War comes in and everything, but and even before the war, the threat of the Dominion and then the Klingons, and that all takes precedence. But I still feel like they could have touched on it more. In fact, there were a couple story ideas to touch on it more, and apparently they dismissed it. Iris and Bear dismissed it. It was like, oh yeah, this is old hat. We've already covered this before. Yeah, but it would take a totally different form. I think the last time they did a truly Bajoran political episode was Shakar in season 3. I think after that, once we get into Rapture and the Reckoning and all that other stuff, like the Pa Wraith cult and stuff, it became less about Bajoran politics and more about this, supernatural fantasy conflict between the Pa Wraith and the prophets. And I think the invention of the Pa Wraith is kind of dumb. But I'll get to that when I get to that. So it became more about the supernatural gods having this, mythological war rather than this religious political situation. And I get that the writers feel like they milked that story for all it's worth, but I still feel like they could have touched on it like a little bit. And so, how does Dominion War affect the Bajoran politics? How does they needed to update it, but instead they just moved on to this like mythological god war, which Roddenberry would have been proud. But anyway, so I mentioned the speech that Sisko gives on the promenade, which was a great speech. And by the way, I think we get some really good acting from Avery Brooks in this episode. The no thing aside, although that's not really his fault, that's more the editing choice of putting it in slow motion that makes that really cheesy. He's actually decent, like particularly the scene where he's talking to Jake, as I said. Was really good. I was thinking, like, and I think probably he does his best work with Jake because the actor Avery Brooks, I think that was his favorite part of the show. In fact, he even said that. I don't have to think that. He's mentioned that in interviews several times. That's the thing he liked most about the show was the fatherly relationship between father and son with to black people, which apparently was not very common in the 90s, and so he thought it was very important. And so I think he definitely puts more effort into it and does like a much better job. But even also the speech, I think he does a really good job with that. We are neither what does he say? Oh God, we are neither evil nor the devil. And I love the way it ends with him talking to Kira at the end, and they're sort of bonding, and she's like, you're right, I don't think you're the devil, and he just smiles. It's like, well, there's hope for us yet. The other good Sisko moment is when Kira's like, oh, a couple Bajoran officers didn't show up. They said they were sick. And he's like, you tell me, but he's like, freaks out and starts yelling at Kira. It's like, you're supposed to be helping me. She's like, I'm doing everything I can. It's not enough. I think that's unfair. But I like, my favorite thing is when he says, you tell those sick Bajorans that they better get well soon, or they're going to be recovering en route on a transfer to their next assignment. Good old Sisko. But yeah, so this again, it kind of books in the start because it begins with the sort of clashing between the Starfleet crew and the Bajorans who run the station, and how at first Kira was very resentful for the fact that the Bajoran provisional government actually called the Federation and was like, we should just be taking care of this ourselves. And so there was a lot of clashing to begin with, which, as I said, it was kind of baked into the show, and it was their excuse to get around. It was their way of getting around the Roddenberry box. of, oh, humans are perfect in the 24th century, so no interpersonal conflicts. Well, let's create a situation where these aliens have to work with these humans and they don't really trust each other, and boom, then they can have interpersonal conflict. But the problem with that premise, and I think I talked about this before, is it was even worse in Voyager when they tried to create it with the Maquis, but that's another subject. But the problem with this premise is that it can only go so far. And so at the end of this episode, it was great having that bookend that, oh yes, we all work together and we all trust each other now. It's kind of solved, and it's, especially in season 2, it's making clear it's even more solved. And so, I mean, there's still the circle, but they're a group of extremists. The bulk of the Bajorans, like especially the ones that work with them, they get along fine. So, especially by the time we get to season 3, that whole situation's solved, and so you no longer have that excuse. So that idea will only take you so far. In fact, I think I would even go as far to say that in this episode, I didn't quite buy how they clashed. In fact, Kira and Sisko clashing felt a bit off because they had kind of, like in Progress, he talked about how they were good friends, and in Duet, Kira says, as a friend, I'm asking you. And then they seem to regress a bit in this episode, but I know a lot of people might think I'm being unfair about that, but that's just how I saw it. But more than that, the whole way that Bajoran stopped going to work, and they're saying, oh, the way that Neela was talking to O'Brien, oh, I don't know about these Starfleet guys. I don't really normally hang out with them. To me, it was like doing a more divide than we'd seen in every other episode. That was fine. There was no divide. But then all of a sudden, it's like, so it's in the pilot episode, and maybe in the next episode, and then it's gone, and now at the end of the season it comes back. That's what it felt like to me. But I don't know. Maybe I'm being unfair. I know some people will think I am. But anyway, I would now like to thank my Patreon supporters very much for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It does help me continue with the channel. I would like to give a big special thanks to Antarius and Brandon Nilhouse. Thank you both so very, very much for your strong support. I would also like to welcome a new Patreon supporter, Benjamin Mead. Thank you so much for joining. Very much appreciated. And I would also like to give a shout out to Greg Marley, Francisco Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Valls, Alessandro Miguelisio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Britton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you also very much for your support. So, we do have a few Patreon comments on this episode. First comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, so, right after one of the best Trek episodes in the franchise, Duet, what do we get right after? Maybe not as up there, but I'd argue yet another banger, where it begins with Keiko as a school teacher having to confront the most evil of female villains, appearing at first to be a religious objector in an evolution metaphor episode, but ends up being a phenomenal Bajoran politics episode yet. This is perhaps the episode that, after other clumsy attempts, truly introduced the phenomenon of Bajoran politics, and with them, Vedek Winn, portrayed by Louise Fletcher, who already was an intimidating icon in TV and cinema as Nurse Ratched herself. Why do I call Winn the most evil of all female villains? I mean, what about the Borg Queen? Or Sela? Or Husaira? Or Seska? Getting there. Or Lursa? Or B'Etor? Or more recently, Maul? Maybe more passionate and not as cold as the female changeling, but so power-hungry and duplicitous. None of them have anything when the villain we love love to hate, comes onto screen and tells Kira, "Patience, child." I mean, what did the villain do in the first episode? Getting into Keiko's face and drive Bajorans from her school, and divisions that would make Ron DeSantis blush, leads with her manipulation of the bombing of the school, and then attempted assassination of her political opponent. Putin, are you cowerling underneath your desk? Add to that the Sydney Opera House hat when she was a Vedek to further her iconic status before trading it in for the gold Kai robe next season. That's actually season after season 3, but anyway. And she is quite a figure. Space Karen memes on social media hardly do justice, even if she insists on talking to the Emissary, as much as she hates him. Poor Neela in the background, looking frightened for a second while O'Brien updates Ops senior staff on his investigation, and had no choice but how to authoritarianism without even having to wear a red MAGA hat in honor of the spiritual leader. On the backdrop, this is the challenge of Starfleet working with the Bajoran staff, and the goal for Bajor to be part of the Federation. Sisko has to get Kira to get staff back to work and not to do lame protests over Keiko's secular teachings, and even have a noble speech on the importance of working together. Fortunately, Winn's plans eventually revealed, Neela is stopped with Avery Brooks's over-the-top "no" slow-mo acting, and at the end of season 1 with no cliffhanger, does end on a hopeful note, as characters such as Winn on a divided and still fresh from occupation in Bajor does not prevail, as after all the bond between Starfleet and the Bajorans is rekindled. Of course, the Circle trilogy happens next, but for now, 9 Sydney Opera Houses on top of a power-seeking evil out of 10. Patience, child. Oh, one more thing that I think many miss. Kira was actually a follower of Winn earlier in this episode. She said she was ready to support her, and to see her see who Winn really is, no riddles needed from the prophets, as it was obvious to her, was gold. Pure gold. Now, I would slightly rephrase that. I would say that she wasn't necessarily a follower of hers. She definitely was, like, she wasn't a part of her flock or whatever. She wouldn't go out and assassinate people. But even though I don't think that Kira particularly followed Winn before she came to the station, I think what Kira meant is that she has my support, is that she agreed with what Winn was doing about the schools, that Bajoran children shouldn't be taught secular schools. So that's what I think she meant, but that is just my particular interpretation. And honestly, I think you give Vedek Winn too much credit, and you don't give DeSantis enough. I don't think it would make him blush. I think what DeSantis is doing is actually much worse, although, well, as far as the book bannings go, I mean, he hasn't tried to assassinate his political opponent as far as I know. But yeah, as far as the trying to shut down the school, that's that was child's play compared to what DeSantis is doing. But anyway, so there was something else I wanted to address. I'm trying to find the most evil of all female villains. All the names you threw out there, I'd be like, okay, I'm with you. Winn is definitely more evil. Until you got to the female changeling. I'm sorry. Winn is more duplicitous. She's more deceptive. And she's sort of, I guess I would say, even less moral. Because as immoral as the female changeling was, she at least was loyal to her own kind. Whereas Vedek Winn would throw anyone under the bus, like she does to Neela. She throws her own follower throws her life away for her own purposes and uses people. Now you could say, oh, the founders use Jem'Hadar and Vorta, but those are Jem'Hadar and Vorta. Who gives a fuck about them? They're not changelings. She would never do that to a fellow changeling. But I'm sorry, but the female changeling is just much, much more sadistic. I mean, she was willing to commit instant, like, genocide on people just because they pissed her off. I mean, and just the way that she did it, like, so cold and heartless, and would just, like, willy-nilly kill millions of people instantly. I think this makes her even worse than Dukat. And I do think Dukat's worse than Winn, but you said female villains, but it's still, as female villains go, unless your argument could be made that she's not really female, that she's just taking a shape of a female, but we don't know that for sure. But anywho, next comment is from Antarius, who says, a strong season finale. The question of whether there is a place for Bajoran religion in the school is very interesting. In my opinion, Keiko is a little bit narrow-minded. Knowledge is not only pure natural science, but it is as important to teach the children about different beliefs, religions, and philosophies without promoting one as the true or right one. Of course, it is okay to say that these beliefs can be proved by science or even disproved, but doesn't mean you can't tell the students that these beliefs exist. But nevertheless, Winn is of course the evil character here. I can't understand why the tool wasn't replicated. That way they would be far less suspicious. The whole murder mystery was less interesting, and because of it, I will not give this episode a higher rating. Quark is right, he isn't a killer, but he came very close to that in the first season. My rating is an 8 out of 10. Now, I gotta disagree with you on the Keiko thing, because I don't think that she was doing what you described her as doing. I don't think she was being narrow-minded. I don't think she was refusing to teach the children about religion, that they exist. I think that because when Vedek Winn first confronted her, she even said, when she said, I respect that the Bajorans believe that this is the Celestial Temple. Sounds pretty respectful for me, but she did say it's not my job to teach them about religion, and that is correct. She's not the religion teacher. That's Winn. She's like, that's your job. So she's not like putting down these religions and saying that they're absolutely wrong, or that they don't exist, or that they're stupid. She's in fact saying, I totally respect them. It's just not my job to teach about them. That's actually your job, and I think she's right there. But that is just me. Now, as far as the tool, I can headcanon this to be... here's my headcanon, that Neela was so shocked and so caught off guard because she wasn't expecting to be caught, and she was so shaken by having to murder someone, that's a fact that she overlooked, that she forgot about the tool because she was too preoccupied. That's my headcanon, but I think that makes sense. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, Louise Fletcher, who played Nurse Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. This time she is playing Vedek Winn, who will sell her soul to become Kai. Winn is an evil Bajoran and will do anything to get real power. Being Kai wasn't good enough for her. We get a stretch of 5 episodes in a row that mainly deals with Bajor, which needed to happen. Maybe it's 6 that started with Dramatis Personae. Kira's character has a complete change in this episode. She was kind of anti-Federation and a Winn supporter. I'm glad that she didn't join the Maquis and ruin her career like some other Bajoran, which I won't name. From season 2 on, Kira's relationship with Sisko is more friendship than a work colleague. The scene with Neela and Vedek Winn is brilliant, and I appreciate that we learn what sort of character she is. Mask off, scumbag. Deep Space Nine has great villains, and Kai Winn is only the 3rd on the list. You all know who is number 1 and number 2, so we know that we now need them to say we don't need to say them by name. So my rating is 8. Quark, you wound me. All these years together, I thought you knew me, Odo. I am not a killer. Odo, no, but your friends are. Quark, true, and I would gladly sell one of them to you if I could, but unfortunately, none of them had taken credit for the death of the Starfleet officer. Sorry, out of 10. Yeah, we do know who those top 2 are, and I will respect your wishes in not saying their name because we all know. Anyone who doesn't know is crazy. But I don't know if I'd put her 3rd. I'm not saying I wouldn't, but I would have to think about it. As I said, mention the female changeling. I think the female changeling would be 3rd, and Winn would be 4th. But because she's just so evil. Anyway, let's see. We got a reply. Stephen Kennedy says, I guess you can add Cardassians to the list, so that's 7 Bajoran episodes out of 10. Or out of 8, sorry. Oh yeah, Cardassians. Forgot about that. But you skip over the episode Cardassians, and you skip over invasive procedures. So yeah, that makes sense. Anyway, next comment is from Ricky, who says, this was a pretty damn good finale. Again, one of the stronger episodes of season 1. And we get the introduction of Kai Winn, who would be one of the villains of the show and a good one. Of course, as the show gets on, she becomes more and more of an antagonist, except for the season 5 episode Rapture, where she was out of character in that episode, but the rest she is pretty evil and power hungry. As for this episode, and I think it's a good one, also the final scene where Sisko goes no and jumping was great. Come on, always love those Sisko moments. So my rating is an 8 out of 10. So yeah, absolutely, and glad, as always, we're on the same page. Rapture, she was totally out of character. Anyway. Also, the other thing about Rapture, and I know I'm talking more about a different episode, but she went on about how she was, grew up in a concentration camp and was beaten, and she didn't have anything to protect her except for her spirituality. Again, that's not the backstory I would have chosen for her. That backstory seems out of place to how power hungry she has come. I think it might be more, I think it would have made more sense if she would actually lived a privileged life of a collaborator, but nobody knew her parents were collaborators, and so she got away with it. And that's why that, to me, that would actually fit closer, or maybe being in an isolated part of Bajor that the Cardassians didn't really touch that much. Something like that I think would have fit. Or something like she kind of learned to manipulate the Cardassians in order to get what she wants, and I don't know. Something like that I think would have fit better. But anyway, thank you, patrons, very much for your comments. So my rating for In the Hands of the Prophets out of 10 is going to be an 8. Extremely good. Yeah, I did really enjoy this episode. I love the metaphor with the creationism versus evolution, and I love the way that Sisko sort of reaffirms like the Federation beliefs to Jake, and how they practice tolerance and know their religious beliefs aren't dumb, and how his aim is to get these two very different cultures to jive and work together and become friends, and how he was really like accomplishing that. I did like that a lot in Vedek Winn, an amazing villain who is very realistic in terms of using religion in order to gain power. And so I thought that was very good as well. And I think they created a very interesting political situation between Bariel and everything. And Neela, the actress, did a really good job of portraying someone who was feeling guilty, but it was kind of a religious fanatic and was brainwashed by a cult. But anyway, that being said, I think the format of the murder mystery didn't really... I don't think it was terrible, but it didn't really work for me. And plus, I felt like this episode was a little bit disjointed. Like, first it was about the school, but they pretty much just abandoned that whole storyline and tossed it aside. Now, I get that the point was that Vedek Winn's plot was just to use that whole, school argument just as a red herring in order to get Bariel to come to the station. But that revelation to me seems to kind of be a cheat in some ways. It felt like a disjointed episode still. It felt like, oh, this is an episode about school and creationism, and then halfway through they just completely forget about it and make it about this assassination attempt instead. I don't know. As I said, it's not like a big deal. I'm not saying it's completely horrible, because I still gave it an 8 out of 10, which is still a very high rating. But I'm just not giving it a 9 or a 10 because I think, it wasn't. I don't think it was like the best episode ever, but definitely a strong way to end the season. I will say that. So anyway, that is it for my review of In the Hands of the Prophets. So be sure to check out Patreon if you really appreciated this channel. If you like this video and like what I'm doing, maybe consider supporting me on Patreon. There's different tier levels, different rewards such as pre-releases, request a video to do, and there's a series of Patreon-only videos that I do. I do a couple a month about Revisited, where I revisit a review I already did. $1 level, you can watch one a month, and $3 level, you can watch them all a month. There's never any guarantee how many there will be each month. It depends on what episodes I cover, but lately I've been doing at least 3 a month. So anyway, but if you're unable to support me on Patreon, that is all good as well. You can still really help out this channel by leaving a like, subscribing, and leaving a comment. Just let me know, did you totally disagree with what I said? Did you love this episode? What did you think about this episode? And so all that helps. Thank you so much. So let's see what's coming up next on my channel. Let's see where we're at. Saturday will be my review for Descent parts 1 and 2. Monday I'll be ranking all of the episodes of Star Trek Next Generation season 6, and on Wednesday I'll be ranking all the episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine season 1. And then on Thursday, one of those revisited I mentioned, I will be releasing publicly as a sort of preview of what I do over on Patreon. I'll be releasing my revisited for Q-Who. That was all the way back in season 2 of TNG. That will be released on Thursday. So, publicly on my main channel for everyone to see. But anyway, So be sure to check me out as I continue to cover Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Star Trek The Next Generation and many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.